Hi, and welcome to Spooky Hours. My name's David Saunderson, and today our special guest is Malcolm Robinson, a paranormal investigator from Scotland who has spent more than the last 40 years investigating Fortean and paranormal things. I don't know what do you call them, Malcolm? What
Yeah,
is the spooky things out there?
I guess it's the paranormal events you would call, and that comprises of ghosts, poltergeists, UFOs, the weird and the wonderful, all shapes and sizes, David. Yeah.
I suppose that's a good way of saying it, isn't it? They're events, aren't they? When everyone talks about a haunting or a UFO abduction or something, it's actually an event in someone's life. How did you get yourself involved in all this?
Well, I've always been interested in the paranormal, David, ever since I was a small child growing up in Scotland. I had this fascination, this deep-held fascination for all things spooky. And I started reading off some books, initially the Pan Book of Ghost Stories, which were
Yeah.
fictionalised. And I went, nah. So I tried to read some of the more better, allegedly true stories. And I started to read them and I went, no, there can't be any validity to this. These are rubbish. And I set out on a one-man crusade to disprove these subjects, to disprove ghosts and poltergeists and UFOs. And in 1979, I formed my own society entitled Strange Phenomena Investigations, who were set up to look at this purposely. But even as a youngster, I've had many events growing up as a young child in Scotland that kind of put me on this pathway, David. So it's always been with me. And it's like anything else in life. Once I started my own research society and once I spent many nights in haunted houses, more than I care to remember, and I saw things and I've had my hair pulled, I've been slapped by nothing, nothing. And that's when I came off the skeptical fence, David. And that's when I began to realise, wait a minute, there is truly something in this. Now, of course, you have the charlatans out there, you have people out to pull the wool over your eyes and get in the newspapers. Once you get rid of this, once you get rid of those people, you are left with a real, true core residue of paranormal cases that demand investigation.
Now, you said you grew up in central Scotland, and I believe up until recently you're actually living in the south of England. And so you've obviously got a good experience all through the British Isles. What was it? What were some of your more early experiences researching or investigating the paranormal when you were young? When you were young,
Well, there's many stories, but some of the ones that just spring to mind, and I've said it on other shows, is the time we were investigating a haunted house in Stirling in central Scotland, and the lady was troubled by paranormal events, things falling off the shelves, being touched, etc. And she was having a very, very troubled time. And we were in this bedroom. We were working in darkness with just a small ambient light pervading the room. And we had all the equipment set up and nothing was happening. And at times like that, I said, well, why do I do this? Then suddenly the whole room exploded, David. And a myriad tiny pinpricks of white lights, sparkling lights all over the walls, all over the ceiling, all over your clothes, all over the bed covers. And I said to her psychic, what is that? And she calmly said, well, that's pure psychic energy, Malcolm. You should know this. I went, yeah.
then?
And so it only lasted about 20 seconds, like a dimmer switch on your wall. It slowly melted away. And the room was once more engulfed in blackness. So with fingers crossed, we rushed to the VCR equipment. It was pre-digital then, VCR tapes. And we pressed stop, we pressed rewind, and we pressed play, and hoping that something was on the videotape. Nothing was on it. And that's the sad thing, and I've said it many times, David, even if we had captured this wonderful event, like a children's November the 5th handheld sparkler, all the sparkling effect, even if we had caught that, would the public truly have accepted it? I've said before, we're living in the Steven Spielberg age of DreamWorks laboratory, where anything can be manipulated to look spooky, to look paranormal. So people might have said, Malcolm, you've made that on a computer or something. And I think what it all boils down to, it comes from that person themselves who's had that experience. And but that one really was quite unusual, yeah.
I mean, I suppose that is right. You've actually got to be there because, I mean, even if we'd seen that on the screen, even if it could just be a light. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know, but you were there. You knew that it couldn't possibly be anything other than something very, very, very strange. What do you actually think it is, though? I mean, you said the psychic there said to you it was psychic energy. What is psychic energy?
Well, again, we have to quantify that. We're living in an age where we're learning all the time. We're learning about ourselves, about the cosmos. Could it be something to do with subatomic particles, neutrinos, quarks, super string theory? All these avenues are being looked at by scientists of today. I think there's something out there, wherever there is, that holds the answer. And sometimes the paranormal can pervade, can loop into our physical reality. And certain people who have that psychic ability, for want of a better word, can get in tune with that. It's like your old radio, the old radios where you turn the dial, BBC Radio 1, BBC Radio 2, you had to then you got that signal. Psychics have that fantastic ability, not them all. Psychics have this fantastic ability to tune in and receive this signal. As to what it truly is, to answer your question, we don't truly know at this time. I can only hope that somewhere along the line in my lifetime, people accept that this is a recognisable phenomena. Because let's be honest, we laughed at John Logie Baird. That'll never work. We laughed at the Wright brothers. That'll never fly. It did fly. It did work. So just because something looks and sounds ridiculous, we should never ever laugh and poo-poo it, because we would be the ones that would get the egg on our face, you know.
Do you think that a lot of the things, I mean, I agree with you 100% what you say there, that I think a lot of the things that we think are paranormal, maybe one day will just be seen as the same as some people might think of a mobile phone being able to ring on the other side of the earth.
Yeah.
And there's nothing particularly interesting in that anymore, isn't there? So do you ever get the feeling that you may find things out and then go, okay, that was a bit boring, or is there so many things out there that, you know, you could find yourself interested in to keep yourself going?
I mean, my resident deity, what my job is to find and get to the truth. If there's charlatans out there, we will expose them as a research society. We want to know what's true and what's not true. And that's part of our job. And it's anybody who's truly into the paranormal, we've got to get the truth. Some people are misled. The vast majority of UFO sightings have natural explanations. People are maybe on drugs and see shapes and see figures. Oh, it was a ghost. Well, we have to check about their medical history. We have to dot the I's and cross the T's to try and find, in most cases, a rational explanation to account for any given event. And that's what we do. Yeah.
Okay. Now, you've got a list. I was going to say list as long as your arm of the cases that you've investigated. The one that I'm very interested in is the Socky poltergeist. Now we've had on the Spooky Hours recently. We've had a lot of interviews with people about poltergeists because I think they're very fascinating, and I actually think they're one of those cases where there's so much evidence it's getting ridiculous now that people dismiss them. What do you think of that statement? Do you think that, you know, poltergeists are real?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And for those people who have experienced this phenomena, then, you know, you're not going to tell them it didn't happen. There's no denying the poltergeist phenomena, just like hauntings, has been with us since time immemorial, since Plato, since all these Socrates and all these people. It's always been with us. You would think we would truly have an answer to explain this. Before I start talking about the Socky poltergeist, I want to tell you what I don't think it is, David. Some of my colleagues would say that the poltergeist is due to the kids going through puberty. The sexual energy, this sexual energy as you go through puberty is somehow manipulating and pushing things off shelves. I don't believe that, because if that was the case, David, we'd be having poltergeist events in every single house in Great Britain, all the troubled teenagers and that. You'd have poltergeists everywhere. So I don't think it's sexual energy. But the Socky poltergeist case is probably one of the biggest cases of poltergeist activity in Scotland. And boy, we've had a lot. And it all started way back in 1960. A young 11-year-old girl by the name of Virginia Campbell was moving from her home in Moville in County Donegal, Ireland, to come over to Socky, a small town near Stirling in the central belt of Scotland. She didn't want to go. She didn't want to go. Her friends were in Ireland. She didn't want to leave Ireland. But her mother, Annie, was coming over with her to a house in Sauchie to be with Virginia's mother's brother, Thomas, and his wife, Isabella, and their 2 children. Anyway, to cut a long story short, they came over to the house, and they were in the house about a week or so. And Virginia was sharing a bed with her cousin Margaret. And they had scratching noises, rumbling noises, footsteps, and they were scared, like any kid would be. So they bounded down the stairs of this house, and coming behind them was the sound like a heavy medicine ball, those big balls that you got in gymnasiums in the 60s. Thump, 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 coming behind them as they came down the stairs. They rushed into the living room. They said to their parents what had happened, etc. And they didn't believe them. They thought, kids will be kids. They're just making it up. So the mother took Virginia, her daughter, back up the stair with Margaret, put her into bed. Then these noises started happening again. These thumpings, scratching noises from the bed covers and from the bedstead as well. Now, things got that bad, things falling off the shelves, things being moved, that they called in the local reverend, a Reverend Lund. Now, he's a man of the cloth. He came up to the house. He spoke to the people in the house. He went into the child's bedroom, and he couldn't believe it. He heard all these noises and these footsteps. He even saw a rippling effect on Virginia's bed covers, as if you had a stone and you threw it into a quiet mill pond. You got all the ripples. And he says, Virginia wasn't doing this. Her hands were, by her side, etc. Then they called in 2 doctors, a Dr. Nisbet and a Dr. Logan. Now, Dr. Logan's testimony is even more outstanding. Credible witness. He said, as he was watching Virginia in her bed, this heavy linen chest, it was about 3 feet long. It used to hold pillows and extra bedding in it. It moved away from the wall itself, moved about several inches from the wall across the linoleum. Then the lid of this linen chest started flapping up and down, making, nobody was near it. Absolutely nobody was near it. And he saw a pillow next to Virginia's head depressed, like a secondary head, invisible head was just resting down on the pillow. And then the pillow underneath Virginia's head rotated 90 degrees. Now, this doctor says, I couldn't believe this. I could not believe what I was looking at. Many strange events happened at that particular time. They decided, well, maybe if we take Virginia away to another auntie in another town, maybe that'll stop it. They did. They took her to a small town called Dollar, which is about 3 or 4 miles away from Sauchie. Happened again. All these bizarre events was happening in this house. This is where it gets even stranger, David, because not only did these paranormal events happen in Virginia's house and the house in Dollar, it followed her to school. I'll give you a quick, for instance, there's so many, it's all in the book. And back in 1960, there was massive big classrooms, about 50 kids, it was really big classes back in the day. And the teacher had given the class an essay to do. So the other class was busy writing away down on their jotters, apart from one little girl. That little girl was Virginia. She had her forearms like this, pushing down on her desk. The teacher says, what are you doing? Stop that at once, Virginia, stop it. And as soon as Virginia lifted her arms up off the desk lid started to vibrate and move up and down. And at that point, an empty desk, which is sitting adjacent to Virginia, rose up a few inches off the ground and clattered back down again. Now, also, this is all true. I interviewed the teacher about this. And on another occasion, Virginia had went to the teacher's desk. And back in 1960, the teachers had a big, heavy wooden desk, David, really big, thick thing, So Virginia went to the teacher's desk. There's my jotter, miss. There's my essay. And put it down on her desk. And just then, a teacher's cane, the teachers pointed to the big blackboard in 1960 with a wooden cane, was lying flat on the teacher's desk, and it started to vibrate. Then it started to raise up and thump, thump, thump on the teacher's table and then fell off the table. Things couldn't get even stranger. They did. Because this table, the teacher's table, her stomach was in front of the long part. Suddenly the table rose up 3 or 4 inches from the floor and spun round. And the teacher's stomach was now in the narrow part of the desk. At that point, a bowl of flower bulbs flew off an adjacent desk and smashed into the wall. So the teacher got up, went to the classroom door and tried to open it, but she couldn't. She says, Malcolm, when I interviewed her, she says, Malcolm, it was like a heavy man was on the other side of the door, pulling it back, not to let me out. So I said to the kids in the class, I said, oh, it must be very windy today. The door's jammed. And then suddenly she opened the door and all the kids just pulled out, fell out of the door. Now, this, I could go on with so many, many more things about this case. It's one of the biggest cases in Scotland. That's why I decided to write a book about the Socky poltergeist. And it details all the events of that day.
We'll make sure we put the links, and indeed a lot of your links you'll be talking about today, we'll put them in the description here. So what do you think a poltergeist is? You told us what you don't think it is. What do you think it is?
Well, I do think that it's some deceased person, somebody who has lived on the earth plane, for want of a better word, and can't accept the fact that it's dead. And so we call them kind of earthbound spirits, people who are caught in this kind of netherworld, you know. And part of our job is to, when we investigate haunted houses, is first and foremost to ensure that it truly is a case we're dealing with, not, you know, somebody trying to pull the wool over your eyes. And if their psychic goes, Malcolm, oh yes, we've got something here. Our job is to find out who's behind it. Who is behind it, and can we help them? I know it sounds Hollywood, but can we move them on to a better place? And that's what we do, David, you know. So we try to move these earthbound spirits on to. That's what I think, to answer your question. That's what I think was the case here, because not only did it follow the wee girl to school, in my research in the book, we uncovered that Virginia moved down to a small town in England called Kempston, and it followed her there as well. It's all in the book.
Yeah, okay. Well, so it's basically, in your mind, an angry spirit.
It is, I would say so. You could interview a number of different researchers and you would get a different take on each and every one.
And that's why I'm asking you the question, because I mean, everyone does have a different view then. But why does it always tend to be, I mean, it always seems to be teenage girls. Why do you think that's the case then?
Well, certainly it's not just girls, of course. It happens to young boys as well. And let's not forget, it does happen to adults as well, because you have many poltergeist manifestations that's happened in households where the male and female have seen this. But as to why it would be centred mostly, in your opinion, around small girls, we really don't know. Virginia was only 11 years old at the time. Did she know anybody that had passed away and maybe was very fond of her, maybe an aunt or an uncle? We never found that out, David, in our investigations. That's only surmising it maybe was someone so close to her who had passed on, just didn't want to leave her. It's not the best explanation in the world, but it's probably the one that I would go with just now.
Do you have what would you say you've obviously investigated lots of different cases and not just this one, but is there sort of a typical poltergeist case?
I think it's probably above the typical poltergeist case, simply because of it's followed the little girl to the secondary house in Dollar, it followed her to school, and it followed her down to England. So its hands and shoulders are way up.
Sorry, I mean, that's an interesting point you've just made, but what would you say was the typical poltergeist case? What would you be your average poltergeist case?
Well, it's the typical poltergeist case is it's a destructive spirit. The poltergeist is a German word for noisy spirit. And so that would move things, smash things about, you know, it would line up chairs on a table. It would destroy the belongings in someone's house, whereas your normal ghost doesn't do that. You know, there are various variations of ghosts. You get a crisis ghost who will only appear on the 21st of June, for instance, on, you know, every 21st of June, walking down this corridor. You'll have ghosts that's transparent. You'll have ghosts that's solid. You would pass them in the street, and we have many cases of that. And I mean, a famous case I researched a while back was this lady, this elderly lady. She lived in Tottenham in West London, and her son was fighting the Nazi U-boat menace in the North Atlantic. So she's sitting in her North London home knitting, and then suddenly it was like an instantaneous television just appeared, and she saw her son flailing about in the cold waters of the icy North Atlantic Ocean. And she could hear in her voice, "Mother, mother," and then the vision went away. Now, I think you know what's coming, but a few weeks later, she got notice from the Admiralty that her son had indeed perished in the sun, in the sea due to the U-boats attacking his ship on the same time, in the same day as she had this vision. So it's pretty bizarre, yeah.
It is. So there is obviously lots of different type of, I'm going to say ghost type cases, and we know them obviously from reading books when we were younger. Like you've written a lot of books, and one of them that I want to talk to you about because I find it fascinating because you've written about the Loch Ness Monster. We're talking to you there. You're in Scotland. It's clearly Scotland's biggest spooky thing, I think. But you went one better than most people, though, didn't you? You actually went into the drink.
Yes, I went to the drink. I mean, before I tell the story, I was always interested as a small boy growing up in Nessie. My father regaled me about the tales of this water beastie. We call them kelpies in Scotland, you know. And it kind of captured my imagination. Then, as a youngster, we went on pleasure cruises up and down Loch Ness, and I was there with a young boy, 12-year-old, looking through the binoculars, hoping against hope that I see something. And yes, I think it was 1994. Yes, that's right. 1994, I had the opportunity to go down into this submarine at Loch Ness. It was moored at Drumnadrochit on the shores of Loch Ness, and it was sponsored by Swatch watches. It was a red and white submarine, maybe only about 23, 24 foot long, a deep sea submersible that they actually use in the North Sea to inspect oil pipes, you know, on the floor. The floor. So I went in there, and I was joined by a couple of other people, very, very cramped, condensation dripping down inside of the walls. You know, if you were claustrophobic, David, you wouldn't have liked this at all. And it had a big, bright frontal glass portal on the nose of the submarine, toughened glass, with about 5 or 6 halogen lights pervading the inky darkness of Loch Ness. There was another portal on the floor of the submarine as well. And we moved out of the bay, and we dropped down to, it was less than 800 feet, just going like this along the loch floor. And the loch floor, people asked me, what was it like? It was just mostly sand. There were hardly any vegetation. There was some rocks protruding through the kind of sandy silt. Of course, that's only the part we went. It may be different elsewhere in the loch. Then suddenly, as we traversed the loch floor, it just fell away. The loch floor just fell away, and you could see a chasm of darkness. And I said to the skipper of the submarine, "Can we go down there? Can we go down there?" You know, and he says, "No, we can't. We've got to stick to an allotted course." People asked, "Did I see Nessie?" No, I didn't. And what I also didn't see was any fish, because obviously at that depth you would expect to get some fish seeing a strange light coming into their domain, so they maybe move into it. Never saw any fish as well. And it was an experience that certainly opened my eyes just to have the opportunity, David, to be under the waters of Loch Ness.
So what do you think about the Loch Ness Monster? Do you think there's anything there then? I mean, you've been down there, you've investigated. What's your view?
Yeah, I do think there's something there. It's not necessarily a monster, for want of a better word. It's certainly not a plesiosaur, because those plesiosaurs couldn't extend their neck like that, you know. It may well be a large sturgeon fish, which can grow up to 14, 15 feet long. I've interviewed so many people at the shores of Loch Ness. I interviewed Father Gregory Brucey, who was a Benedictine monk. In 1971, he saw a long, slender neck with a sheep-like head rising up from the waters of Loch Ness and cascading back into the depths. I interviewed former water bailiff Alex Campbell, who back in 1934 was the first man to put Nessie on the world stage when he put in a lady's sighting of Nessie, and it just went from there. I mean, they've scanned it from satellites, for any. Back in 1987, Operation Deep Scan was a flotilla of the most sophisticated sonar that ever in the world. And so all these ships lined up abreast of each other and went up and down the loch. They got about 5 or 6 anomalous returns on their sonar scope, which even the seasoned skippers of these boats says, well, it's not a grouped shoal of fish. We don't know what it is. And one of the boats went back to try and find out this long 30-foot sonar contact, and they couldn't find anything. So I do think there's something there, but it's certainly not a monster as such. And out of all the books I've written, my book on Nessie, I believe, is probably the best one.
I've always thought, like, having spoken to people about it and people that know about these type of things, that it's there are creatures that can grow larger, like you just said, the fish and maybe eels and things like that,
Yeah.
and they live and die like others do. You get bigger ones, you get smaller ones, and over the years, it's all sorts of things. So
Yeah.
it's one of those things. I think it's quite romantic, the idea of a Loch Ness monster, but it's not something. Maybe it might not exist, but the stuffed toys they sell by the lock is quite nice, and and that's quite fun. Now we've spoken of we've talked of different planes, and we've spoken of this Earth, but you're interested in UFOs as well. Now I don't know as much about UFOs because I think there's so much there that's to be discussed. What do you think of UFOs? I mean, you obviously follow the thing, but have you got enough evidence yet to think that there's something out there?
Well, I used to be embarrassed to say this on any interviews and television and radio, but I'm not embarrassed now. I firmly, firmly believe wholeheartedly that we're dealing with something non-human, something that's always been with us through time immemorial. We see it in the Renaissance paintings, we see it on cave paintings as well. And so it's always been with us. There is an agenda of what's going on here. There is an agenda, but what is that agenda? And again, all ufologists the world over have their own take. Some say that it's some form of interbreeding program going on, that's like they're taking sperm over from males and females and creating some form of hybrid child. And some of the female abductees that I've spoken to said, Malcolm, I was taken on board this UFO and I was shown this horrible little child, and telepathically it was said to me, it belongs to you. And I mean, Scotland as a nation has seen many, many UFOs throughout this country, and I've written about them in a number of books and stuff like that. And there's no denying that we're dealing with a real bona fide presence, something that can fly in excess of anything we know currently. Even recently, the American Air Force and government have opened up and showed you some fantastic footage of these blips flying across the sky. So we're dealing with something real. Some of it, if not a lot of it, could be our own black budget technology. The stealth aircraft was flying for at least 10 years before the American military machine put their hand up and says, it's ours. But that gave rise, David, to many false UFO reports. A lot of things being seen in the skies of this planet are our own technology. And the governments are more than happy for the ground-based observer to say, well, it's a UFOs, because it masks what's really going out. But above that, we're still dealing with a very, very small percent of anomalous objects that defy explanation, and it's my job to try and find out what's the truth. And we even went down to 10 Downing Street, myself and Provost Billy Buchanan, back in the 90s, and we demanded that the government come to Scotland and look at our research. We'd done it with John Major, Gordon Brown, and the various other prime ministers. It all fell on deaf ears. What they said, David, was that as these objects did not constitute a threat to the defence of the United Kingdom, the British government would not seek to open up a government inquiry. Now, some of the signs, David, were so close, people could have thrown a stone at these things. So it really aggravates me sometimes, you know.
I can imagine. When you talk to when you're investigating and you're talking to witnesses in the with the UFO abductees, how do you find them? Do you find that there's any particular link between them? Is there something that there's common about the people? When I say common, as in there's something linking them all. They're all the same type of event.
Yeah, I mean, again, a lot of researchers would give their own impression and ideas on what that is. Some say it's a certain blood group, and these abductees share a certain blood group. Some say that they've been abducted. It's like a genetic tree that spans through, centuries. That their grandfather, great grandfather, was abducted or had dealing. I know it sounds marvelous, and
Mm.
I can only tell you what people are saying.
Yeah.
But they're not denying that people have these experiences. Now, I've only personally dealt with, face to face with two men that I'm writing about just now, the A70 incident, which is again Scotland's biggest UFO case. That is a massive case. And these guys totally impressed me. They had nothing to gain, David, from making up this story. If anything, it affected their life in a negative way with all the bad press, and they got mocked, family and friends and workmates, etc. So yeah, you have to watch.
Yeah. So, what did you? I mean, it's I like saying this, but did you think they were of sound mind when you were
Absolutely.
talking to people? Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, and one of the witnesses in the A70 case, if we have got time, I'm happy to tell
Yeah.
you about.
Of course. Go ahead. Go ahead.
One of the witnesses passed the BBC lie detector test, but I'll be very brief. I mean, this is basically what happened with this major Scottish UFO abduction case. I've mentioned it on various shows, but for your own viewers, it goes like this. 1992, August, Gary Wood and Colin Wright were driving from Edinburgh, the built-up city of Edinburgh, to a small place called Tarbrax in West Lothian. They were travelling down the A70. Now, the A70, once you come out of Edinburgh, farmland, fields for miles, very desolate. So as they're driving down to Tarbrax, about 10:30 or so at night, as they were approaching a blind bend in the road, Colin said to Gary, Colin was in the passenger seat, says, "Oh, what's that?" And they looked through the windscreen of the car and they saw this massive dome-shaped craft, this black, shiny craft hovering about 20, 30 feet above the road. Now, Gary knew, whoa, this is not a conventional aircraft. This is not a conventional helicopter. What the bloody hell is this? Rather than stop the car and go back, he decided to put his foot to the metal and drive underneath it. As the car, if you can imagine, as the car was directly underneath this hovering object, this object emitted like a heavy silver shimmering curtain of mist, came down and hit the top of the car. As soon as that happened, both men were enveloped in total and inky blackness. They couldn't see their hands in front of their face. They couldn't see each other. They couldn't see the dashboard of the car. Where are we? Gary thought he was dead. Seconds later, or what appeared to be seconds later, they regained their sight and the car was shuddering violently. It was on the wrong side of the road. They had to bring it back onto the right side of the road, and they drove onto their destination of Tarbrax. They knocked up the people of the house, and the lady of the house says, "Where have you been? Where the hell have you been? What time do you call this? You're an hour and a half late." Really? The journey should only have taken them 30, 35 minutes. They were over an hour and a half late, David.
Mm.
So they proceeded to tell the occupants of the house what they had seen a short while ago. And then that night and subsequent nights, they had strange dreams of these small grey creatures. They had marks on their bodies that previously were not there before. We all know our bodies. We go into a shower, we know what's what. Wow, where did these come from? To cut a long story short, they eventually found my society, Strange Phenomena Investigations. We were based in Alloa, and they called me up and I spoke to Gary. And at that time, I advocated the use of hypnotic regression as a tool to retrieve and unlock hidden subconscious recall. And I said to Gary, look, do you want to use this? It might work, it might not work, or it might provide you with stories that maybe you don't want to know. Malcolm, I'll do anything. I just need to know what happened on that bloody road. So we subjected both men to hypnotic regression by a clinical hypnotherapist, qualified hypnotherapist. And very briefly, before I end the story, this is a story that came out under hypnosis. That effect hit the car. At that point, I know it sounds Hollywood, but it's consistent with other stories. They were taken out of the car by these small grey creatures, roughly 3.5, 4 foot tall, pear-shaped heads, black inky almond-shaped eyes, and taken on board, presumably, this object, and taken into separate rooms. Both men were stripped naked. Gary found himself on a flat raised table with these small grey creatures moving around, and he saw this device coming up from the floor and spin around in front of his face. And Colin found himself enclosed in this like a glass or perspex chamber, and he was really frightened, and he started to cry, and then it started to freeze up, and then it defrosted again. And it was just something totally out of their whole ballpark. They didn't want this in their life. They had no interest in UFOs at all. They're just normal guys, like most people are, you know. And so, I mean, there's much more to the story than that. And I know we're running out of time, but that's basically
And you're right. You said you've mentioned this in your previous book, but you're now expanding on it to write a full account of this case.
Absolutely. This will make up the mainstay of my latest book, purely and only on the A70 UFO abduction. It has appeared in one of my earlier books, but I felt that this case needed a standalone book just on that and that alone. I'll be presenting all the hypnotic regression transcripts. I'll be showing a lot of new stuff as well, you know. So it's a massive case. And you asked earlier, you know, what do I believe? What do I think about any of these witnesses? These guys were true as the day is long. Now, I know people can lie. Police officers can lie. The politicians, well, they're well known for it. But honestly, I've interviewed so many people. You get to see body language. You get to see signs. And these guys are telling the truth. Absolutely.
Well,
But what is that truth? But what is that truth? That's the thing.
That's right. Something happened. We just don't know what it is, and that's what you're trying to find out. Well, thank you, Malcolm. I think we could, again, with lots of people we interview on the Spooky Isles, we could talk for eons on all these things, and we'd love to get you back sometime to talk about some more things, because I think there's so many cases that you've investigated that we could all learn from. So thank you very much, and you have a great night.
Thank you very much, David. All the very best. Cheers now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.